This all comes as a poll finds that Americans' attitudes about race relations have plummeted since President Obama was elected. Right now, only 52% of whites and 38% of blacks have a favorable opinion of race relations here in the U.S. At the beginning of President Obama's first term, 79% of whites and 64% of blacks held a favorable view of that same relationship. Let's talk about it. Jehmu Greene is a Fox News contributor. David Webb is host of the David Webb Show on Sirius XM Patriot and co-founder of the Tea Party 365. Welcome to you both.
Good to see you.
All right, Jehmu, what do you make of this conversation that's been launched and that our own Bill O'Reilly has stayed on? He says there are difficult topics to discuss. How do we open this conversation?
I agree with Bill that this is a difficult conversation to discuss. I agree with him on some aspects of it, but I think there were some parts of it that were a bit ridiculous. When he says own people, aren't we all Americans? Isn't this all an American problem that we all should be focused on? So pointing to only the civil rights leadership as being responsible for the deaths that are happening in Chicago is wrong and is a part of how we are being split apart racially in this country. So we can't just say it's the responsibility of black leaders to fix this problem. It's the responsibility of all of us. And the level of attention that this conversation has gotten after the Trayvon Martin trial or Zimmerman trial is the level of attention that we should be looking at this every single day. Al Sharpton has a national television show. Why isn't he talking about these issues every single day, starting marches and rallies that are focused on this every day? Why do we only talk about gun control when young kids are killed in Connecticut? This is a problem that we all need to understand does not get as much attention. We all are responsible for name calling, which is something that folks on the right like to do, calling the president race baiting, calling them race hustlers, calling people thugs. That does no good at all. It is an industry that both the right and the left are engaged in, and it is absolutely ineffective.
David?
Well, I know Jehmu's referring to me because I call them the race profiteers, and I do it because it's based on the fact of how they act. But Bill, Jehmu equates a number of things that are wrong here. One, she says it's an American problem. That's true. But the purported leaders, those who have set themselves up as leaders, Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, and all the others, they've failed to highlight the problems and deal with them as they happen, because in the grievance industry, it's more important to have the fight. They're having the same fight as in 1964, 65. This is 2013. And while we can't pretend that racism doesn't exist, we can't pretend it exists everywhere. So now what do? Bill's talking about accountability and responsibility. What do a group of people who have a serious problem as part of the American mosaic do? Yes, all have to be involved in this. It doesn't just affect blacks, but they need to take on this issue at the community level. And the grievance industry has spent a whole lot of time in the argument, in the fight. They can rally all they want, but they don't advance actions that actually provide solutions.
Well, the problem is, Shannon, that David Webb only is making an industry for himself in pointing fingers at these leaders. Let's start talking about the fact that Head Start funding has been decimated. And when states are deciding on how many prison beds they're going to have by looking at 3rd and 4th grade reading rates, we need to refund Head Start. When we look at the fact that these young black men don't have anything to do except be babysat by gangs, we need to make sure that there are after-school programs that are funded. We need to make sure that there's something else that they can be involved in. And saying smaller government is not the solution. So what is the right's solution on this? And also saying government spending is the solution, that's not it also. We do have to focus on the aspects of the culture and the disintegration of the black family in the way that Bill O'Reilly has said, but you can't demonize it. You have to understand that there are some responsibilities that are tied to racial inequality in this country, and there are some things that are tied to our visual culture. And our visual culture tells us that we should not value black men, that they aren't worth anything, that they are up to no good, and we have to change that. We in the media can't make a living off of only pointing fingers at people we disagree with without saying, these are solutions. Why aren't you talking about this? Give give this issue a platform.
Let's pause just for a second. Let me ask you about this, because you brought up so many things there that have been part of this discussion. You talk about children and education. You talk about young men who don't have anything to do and they don't have different outlets. Unsupervised, that's not good for kids of any race when they're, have nothing to do and the parents aren't involved in education, those kinds of things. But you talked about the family core and how that's been under attack, how there's discussion. How do you have discussions about topics that are very hotly contested by a lot of people, and they're very emotional for a lot of people, in a way that you can make progress with that discussion where you're actually talking about the problem? Is there a way to do that without inflaming tensions and emotions?
There is. If you have a discussion where you first start with talking about the issue, not coming from a partisan lane on this. Look, family breakdown in the black community absolutely swung since the 60s. We now have a situation where there are too many children born out of wedlock, out of a two-parent household.
Which, regardless of race, that tend to shift you towards complications and poverty and lack of education,
right,
in many cases.
It follows with often failure in education, and I'm all for fixing education. Broken education system supported by groups like the NAACP, which frankly has a national policy against charter schools and magnet schools and school choice in general, when that has been proven to help. You have a good, hang on. I didn't say 100%, Jehmu, but let me finish my point. If you have all these options on the table and more, and you find ways, you will have solutions. Family environment, blended families, whatever version of it, get a stable family environment. Good education leads to better economic future. And we cannot have this conversation without actions. Look, rallies are great. They get attention. But instead of 100 rallies in 100 cities, or in addition to do the rallies, then have 100 meetings with neighborhood watches, with families, with communities. Get them to learn to live with each other, work together, and solve the problems which are localized. The federal approach doesn't work because communities are different.
But it's also not, again, this civil rights industry myth. Because I worked a lot with MTV when I was at Rock the Vote. Who has glorified the baby mama culture with Flavor Flav when MTV was going to go with that show Buck Wild, and you saw all of those West Virginia politicians say, you are not going to represent our community in this way? Guess what? They won. But we have allowed the entertainment industry to glorify this type of behavior without that pushback. So it's not just civil rights folks who have a role to play in this. We need to look to Hollywood and say, why are you not representing black people in the true way that we are? And we're not a monolith. We are not all how you see black men represented in entertainment, and that's a problem.
Well, let me ask you about this, because you talked about West Virginia leaders, and I think a number of them come to mind who were very upset about that program and pushed back. Does that say then there's a greater weight on black leaders when they see negative programming and things that encourage behavior that's not going to benefit people in the long run? They then have a duty to step up and also say, we don't want you playing those videos, that misogynistic music, and those things that encourage drug use, whatever it is. Is there a greater weight on them to step up and say that?
Shannon, I'm going to back away from the greater weight, because I'm an American, and I think that great weight, everyone should feel it. We shouldn't just have white celebrities tweeting about trade. Wait a second, David. We shouldn't have just white celebrities tweeting about the pain of the verdict in the Zimmerman trial, and not have paying any attention to how the industry that they make millions of dollars of profits on have profited off of very negative messages. So if Kirstie Alley wants to get involved with the Trayvon Martin situation, then she needs to get involved with the deaths in Chicago. In the same way we hold Sharpton, Jackson, black civil rights leaders responsible, David Webb, you are responsible. What are the ideas you're putting on the table? 90% of your tweets are about calling these people names. Imagine if 90% of your Twitter feed was
I'm not going to get into a personal battle, but greater weight matters here.
We are out of time. So
greater weight matters here. You cannot apply to the West Virginia and Buck Wild and not say the Congressional Black Caucus and those leaders can be also silent on the shows that you're talking about. So if you're going to apply greater weight, apply even weight. I agree it's one country. But we are seeing a divide that is being led heavily by many people who want to profit off the argument and not having a solution, because then they become irrelevant.
We got to leave it there. It's just the beginning of this conversation. Thank you both very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.